QAS test, April 2017. And the question says the author quoted in lines 58 through 60 expresses which view of the study's results. So the best way to solve this is let's go up to lines 58 through 60, read it, and kind of see what is he saying about the study's results. So, as one author of the study writes, people seem to have just a tiny glimmer of insight into how they are uniquely viewed by particular other people. And let's get a sense of what the context is. So this comes immediately after they're talking about, this comes immediately in the part of the passage where they're talking about the findings of whether or not we can predict how individuals feel about us. So they already said that people are pretty good at predicting how a group will feel about us, but how do they do when we're predicting how specific individuals, right? You may know how your coworkers feel about you, but do you know how specific coworkers that you work with, how each of them individually perceives them? This is saying evidently no, and here is the author of the passage basically elaborating or explaining the finding, and he's saying we only have a tiny glimmer of insight, so we only know a little bit about how we're uniquely viewed by particular other people. So these are the two things that I think are most important in these lines, is we have a tiny glimmer of insight, so some insight but very small, and it's about being viewed by particular other people. So we got to remember that we're talking about individuals here, right? So let's go down to the answer choices and let's try to choose one. So A says that the author's quote basically indicates that there is a small but promising chance of correctly predicting how one is perceived. So this could work, right? A small chance of correctly predicting how one is perceived. So this could be good. I would keep this one for now. Then we have B, which says they show that individuals generally know very little about how they're regarded by groups of people. So we know very little. That does match what we're talking about, right? Tiny glimmer of insight, generally know very little. However, this part here says how they are regarded by groups of people. And if we remember, the sentence or the quote up here is talking about particular other people. We're talking about individuals. And moreover, the passage really says that we're actually good at understanding how groups of people view us, so we can get rid of B for sure. C says they reveal that one individual hardly knows what another individual thinks of him or her. This is good. We're talking about two individuals, right, and how they understand us. And we're basically saying we hardly know how another views us. And I think that matches this here. Just a tiny glimmer of insight means we hardly know, right? It's emphasizing the fact that we only know a little bit about it, and we're talking about individuals, so I say keep this one. Then we have D, which says they confirm that one's predictions about other people's impressions are no better than random guesses. So here, the issue, I think, is this part here, which sticks out to me, no better than random guesses. So I don't think that's right because it is saying that we have some insight. It's a tiny glimmer of insight. It's not much insight, but it's definitely better than a random guess. So we can get rid of D. So that's going to leave us with answer choices A and C. And this is actually kind of a hard question to solve, and a lot of students get mixed up. So let's pause for a moment. Let's see if we can figure out how are we supposed to solve this, and what do we do when we're encountering a hard question on the test. So first thing that I do is I try to pull them apart. A lot of what the issue is that we start to blend them together. We don't notice the distinction between them. We think they're almost saying the same thing. So what we want to do is kind of locate the differences between them. So they're both making the case that there's a small chance, right? A says there's a small chance, and C is saying that we hardly know, right? And both of them, actually, only C is really specifying the individual, whereas D is kind of talking a little more generally. That's a distinction there. The other thing is that A has this little adding that there's a small but promising chance here that C doesn't have. The other thing is that I think C is just a little bit more general, right? Again, I think it's because A is mentioning this small but promising chance, whereas C is just more neutral, even just in terms of the language it's using. One individual hardly knows what another individual thinks of him and her. It's just very distant, it's very abstract. So for that reason, I'm going to start to put the weight towards C. And really, I think what ultimately is going to push me to choose C over A is this part here, about a small but promising chance. So maybe it's promising because it's small, but it's a glimmer of insight. Maybe, like, on its own, it's okay, but when you compare it to C, this promising becomes a little bit problematic. And I think the reason is because there's nothing in the passage that would suggest some sense of hope or some sense of promise for our ability to look at how people think about us. So really what you want to do is you want to locate the differences or the distinctions between the two, and you want to choose the simpler version. If something has an extra element like this promising, it tends to be more wrong. It makes it too specific, more likely to be wrong. So for that reason, I think we can get rid of A, and then we'll choose answer choice C as our correct answer for question 17.